So in simple terms, I'm a structural engineer and I work in design. And so I design buildings. So I've been doing that for about 25 years. It used to look like working with big teams, normally led by architects who have the big vision for how a building might look and how it might function. And I used to specialize in things like big stadia, like the Athens Olympic Stadium or the Wimbledon #1 court movable roof. Quite big things like sports venues, tall buildings, big convention centers, things like that. So my day-to-day would be working with lots of other engineers in a team, working out how a building might stand up, what materials it might be made out of, how it feels to be inside that building, the impact of building that building on the people in the community and sort of in the area where it might impact people. But now, as I've become more experienced and in more of a leadership role, I'm really focused on how we can evolve that role. So really, engineering was always about keeping people safe, but we're really focused on environmental and social impact now. So now my role still involves designing buildings, but looking at how we can reduce the negative impact of those buildings on the environment and how we can make the most positive impact possible on both the environment and the people that use those buildings. It could be anything from a year to 10 years. So if I think about the Wimbledon #1 court, which finished in 2019, we started that design 6 or 7 years before. So for really large projects, there's couple of years of design, and then that design moves into the construction, and we're involved in making sure that whatever we intended through the design is actually realized in construction. But smaller projects don't take as long. Some we might be designing for a year or two before they start being built on site. So it really depends on the size and the scale and also the complexity of the project. It's such a rewarding career, and it's as well as challenges, there's a lot of opportunities, but certainly at the moment, the biggest challenges are to design really great buildings, but do them in a way that isn't having the detrimental impact on the environment that it currently has. So we're all focused on climate action, but we know that construction has up to 40% contribution to global warming. So it's changed the way we focus on what we do. Before it was very much about, historically, it was about the biggest building or the longest span or the most impressive. But that's not okay anymore in the context of the future. And so how do you still deliver really great buildings that help people thrive as well as survive, and at the same time be really mindful about their impact on the environment? And we also know that impact on the environment is also impacting the most underserved in our community. So wrapping all of that into delivery of buildings is more challenging, but actually I think more purposeful as well. I think it's changed with every sort of large project or experience I've had. So, I was very fortunate to gain my undergraduate degree in Australia. And from that moment, I always felt like, well, I could work anywhere. So I had a great baseline training. I moved to Perth after I graduated. And that was really interesting. That introduced me to bridges and an introduction into tall buildings. And like many Australians that travel to Europe to have that kind of life experience, I did the same thing, but with a few years of experience. When I got to London, I was introduced to stadia. And I thought that's pretty cool at the time. I just had a couple of years experience, and I loved coming back home and saying, I designed stadia. And it just felt much bigger than anything I had experienced before, not just in engineering, but really in life as well. So that kept me going. But then I was introduced in London to the principles of good design. that sort of stem from architecture and urban design, but really follow into engineering. And that was the motivator. Like, how can I become a better technical engineer and contribute to some of these really amazing buildings? And then I think once I had delivered some of these larger projects, that's when I really felt like there has to be more. I want my legacy at the end of my career not just to be about fancy buildings for privileged people, but I want it to have more meaning. And I think that comes back to some of the values we have as Australians as well. Sort of a social conscience, I guess.